So welcome back. When we last met, virtually at least, we were talking about job analyses and the concepts that a job analysis is the building block on which we're going to basically determine the how we're going to do the rest of industrial organizational kind of personnel psychology, the I side. That when we're trying to figure out how do we measure performance, we're going to go to that job analysis. When we're trying to figure out what knowledge, skills, and abilities are necessary to advertise or recruit for a job, we're going to go to that job analysis. When we're wanting to figure out how we can predict future performance, we're wanting to again go to that job analysis. So we're going to talk today about one of those specific areas of industrial psychology, the personnel side, the I side, that is strongly drawn from the data we gather in the job analysis, and that's performance appraisal. So performance appraisal, again, in industrial organizational psychology, what we're referring to when we talk about performance appraisal is a systematic way to accurately measure with reliability and validity performance in any one job. So obviously, to begin with, we need to know what the job entails. We need to have a very good, solid definition of the core tasks or goals or objectives of a job in order for us to be able to know what we should measure as far as trying to capture performance. Going back to the lectures where we were talking about statistics, again, we're also wanting to make sure that our performance appraisals are reliable. In other words, if someone is a top performer, they should score very highly whenever we measure their performance. Also, if someone is a low performer or a inadequate or an unacceptable performer, we should see a reliable measure of that. And finally, validity, truthfulness. When we say that we're measuring performance, are we actually capturing as much of performance as we are actually interested in? So an overview of performance appraisal, a definition. It's a systematic review. And again, systematic, that's a major part that we're going to hear over and over and over again. That part of what industrial organizational psychology brings to the workplace is research and empirical studies that show that one of the first steps you need to take if you want to increase the accuracy of anything you do in the workplace is to make sure that you're doing it in a very systematic and structured way. So it's a systematic or structured review and evaluation of job performance. So review and evaluation. Again, this definition tells us a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about performance appraisal. So it also lets us know that there's two main things we're going to use performance appraisal for. We're going to review performance. In other words, we're going to find where it's good and where it may be not so good. So it's going to be able to provide feedback through that review. But it's also going to include the component of evaluation. In other words, it's going to rank or evaluate the performance. And finally, once we have that review and evaluation of performance, we have the rest of that definition and the provision of performance feedback. In other words, letting the person know, either through their evaluation or hopefully more through the review, of where they're at compared to where they need to be or where they could be. And it plays a very important role in organizational life. So the performance appraisal system, determining who is worthy of rewards, who is worthy possibly of termination, who does their job really well, who does their job poorly, and what components of their job are struggling with. So a performance appraisal can not only identify individual achievement, both positive and negative, it can also find deficits in performance across a group of people. In other words, it may find that everyone's doing really well when it comes to sales, but they're not that good at promotions, and that also can give an organization information about how to improve that situation through training. So the purposes of performance appraisal, based on that definition again, are twofold. There's the review part and the evaluation part. The evaluation part maps most onto personnel decisions. So using and deciding who gets promoted, who gets fired, who gets demoted, who gets laid off, but also decisions about raises and other bonuses. So generally speaking, the personnel decision points is, again, if an organization has a leader who is making these kind of decisions without a valid and reliable performance appraisal system, there is going to be more error and there is going to be less productivity in general. Every time you promote someone that shouldn't be promoted, or you fire someone that shouldn't have been fired, or you give a bonus or award to someone that doesn't deserve that bonus or award, the result is a less efficient organization. Therefore, the more confident we can be about these decisions through a good performance appraisal system, the better that company is going to do. The second part or the second purpose of performance appraisals again maps onto that definition with the review part. So for developmental purposes, not actually making decisions, but just trying to help all of the employees in an organization to perform better. In other words, a good performance appraisal system will not only rank your employees, it will also point out the specific strengths and weaknesses of each employee, and hopefully be done in a way that can provide direct, actionable feedback, information about performance or behaviors that the employee could do to actually do better. So it facilitates employee advancement, which is good for the organization. And it's good for the organization at two levels. If you're using performance appraisal to provide developmental feedback, developmental purposes, you, one, are starting to build employees that are going to be better at their jobs. You're identifying weaknesses, and you're trying to, through training, through coaching, through feedback, to eliminate those weaknesses. It also has a secondary purpose on the organizational side. So again, most of this is on the I side. Personnel decisions are very industrial. But in the development of increasing performance is very industrial. But as far as the organizational side of IO psychology, when you have employees that are being facilitated in their advancement, they're being given skills, they're being told how to do a better job, they usually also respond by having more organizational commitment, and they're usually more satisfied with their jobs. Additionally, performance appraisal on a legal stance can also be used for the documentation of organizational decisions. So it's important to keep track of employee performance patterns over time, and it's important to document performance. So if an organizational decision is made, if someone is promoted, those people that aren't promoted may challenge that promotion and could conceivably challenge it in a court of law. The more actual, documentation of performance that the organization has, the harder it would be for that person to bring a legal challenge. So it provides detailed accounts of also inadequate performance if the organizational decision is towards the termination of an employee or the firing. If someone's fired, again, one of the recourses is they could try to bring a civil lawsuit against the organization for wrongful termination, especially if they believe they were terminated because they were a member of a protected legal class, ethnicity, gender, nation of origin, etc. So again, if the organization though has a detailed documentation of poor performance, it'll be much harder for that suit to go forward. So ineffective performance appraisal systems can have widespread implications. So not only if we have an ineffective performance appraisal system is there going to be inaccuracy in the decision making, there's going to be inaccuracy in the feedback given to employees on how to improve. It also will be harder to document and protect the organization from possible legal challenge. So we're going to talk about specifically some of these actual implications for poor performance systems. So negative repercussions if not carefully developed and implemented. So when performance appraisal systems are kind of left to just rules of thumb or the way we've always done things or just a manager basically rating people in an office somewhere, a lot of problems can occur. So the first is that wrong people can be promoted, transferred, or fired. So again, this can result in ineffective upper level management because the people being promoted won't be good managers. It involves possibly transferring people into departments where they're not going to be performing as well. And it can also be terminating people that shouldn't have been terminated, that the organization is actually losing valuable human resources. Generally speaking, also, when you find a poor performance appraisal system, you're going to find inequitable feelings could develop in the higher performing individuals who receive smaller rewards or than the lower performing employees. So basically, what happens is if that higher performing employees receive smaller rewards than lower performing employees, what you're doing is you're rewarding poor performance and you're punishing high performance. Generally speaking, employees have a good idea how well they're doing compared to their other employees. Managers often are only getting small snapshots of what performance looks like amongst their subordinates. Your peers, though, the people that you work along with at the same level, usually have a very good idea because they have day-to-day interactions with everyone at their level. Who's the top performers, who's the bottom performers, who's struggling. If the reward system based on performance appraisal is not mapping on to those perceptions, the result can be that your top performers become unmotivated and your lower performers basically think that they're doing better than they are. Legal suits are much more common when there's a weak performance appraisal system, and legal suits are much more likely to be successful when there's a weak performance appraisal system. And finally, if you have a poor performance appraisal system, generally you're going to find disgruntled employees at almost all levels and a reduction in motivation, especially if you compare an organization with poor performance appraisal to one that has a very good, valid, and reliable performance appraisal system. So the role of IO psychology in performance appraisal. IO psychologists are often hired to develop and implement performance appraisal systems. So it's clear that these systems are very closely tied to outcomes that organizations care about. Organizations care about performance and they care about rewarding performance. And these are systems to make sure that they're doing it accurately. Due to the measurement expertise of IO psychologists, human resources, and organizational psychology background, there's a strong desire for IO psychologists to be involved with this process. So what that means is that IO psychologists bring a unique set of skills to this problem. They've been trained on human resources and organizational psychology, so they know about how people react to various systems and organizations. But in addition to that, they have a strong focus on measurement expertise. In other words, statistical measurement of constructs, which is what performance generally is. Now again, in some jobs, performance can be very objective to measure. If the job is very simplistic and there's a very concrete outcome, you create wallets and you're expected to create 30 wallets with no errors per hour. Well, then performance measurement's pretty easy. You've got two constructs. How many hours or how many wallets do you make in an hour and how many errors are there in those wallets? But in most jobs, performance is a much more varied construct that's much harder to measure, and that's where IO psychologists really do come to the forefront in this. Company human resource departments also employ IO psychologists to oversee performance management. So we're going to talk a little bit about performance management across the next two slides. The difference between a performance appraisal system and a performance management system is a performance management system includes a good, valid, and reliable performance appraisal system, but it takes it one step further and actually fully integrates this idea of review or developmental feedback. It creates a system of the measurement of performance, the delivery of the feedback about that performance, actionable goals for that employee to work towards, followed by additional performance appraisal to see if they've actually gotten better. So, performance management, a definition, a motivational system of individual performance improvement. So this is the idea of really focusing, again, adding structure and a systematic methodology to using performance appraisal to maximize developmental improvement. So it includes objective goal setting. An objective goal is a goal that is clearly defined and has specific behaviors that will get to the goal. So basically telling someone, be more friendly, is not an objective goal. Telling someone, make sure you always say please and thank you, and always end every conversation smiling when you interact with your subordinates. That's an objective goal. It has clear behaviors that can clearly be added to each interaction. Continuous coaching and feedback. So once those goals are set, there should be additional meetings between the person that is trying to attain the goals and their management through coaching and feedback. So the manager might occasionally check in. So how'd your conversation with your subordinates go this morning? Did you make sure to say please and thank you? Did you do your smiling? And again, it can be any type of actual behavior feedback. I'm just using being more pleasant as an example. And to give feedbacks. Well, I've heard from the employees that they kind of notice what you're doing, but it still seems a little fake. Let's talk about how maybe we can change that goal a little bit. And then again, the performance appraisal. So checking, 3 months ago, you were rated as a 3 on a 5-point scale of friendliness. You're now up to a 3.5. It clearly is starting to work. Let's talk about how to make it better. And further developmental planning. Where do we go from here to keep that improvement occurring? So the components are generally linked to company goals. And what that means is this objective goal setting, the coaching and feedback, the performance appraisal, and the developmental planning is usually going to be on key behaviors that will result in actual outcomes in the organization. So in the example of being more friendly, that might have been someone that's job was public relations or human resources, or maybe even their job is customer relations. And in that goal, the goal is to have 100% satisfaction, which is probably linked to being friendly. So this is the idea that performance management is implemented on a continuous cycle. It's not just an annual or semi-annual measurement of performance, which then is used to either give raises or not. It's really tying performance management into a developmental system. So, We want to talk about the different approaches of performance appraisal. So early researchers really focused on the rating scales themselves, with the idea that the best way to increase performance appraisal was to increase accuracy, and that was the primary goal. So rating formats and rater error were the focus. The contemporary issues emphasize the social psychological process in the social context. So today, when we talk performance appraisal, we usually are talking about it in a contextual approach. And what that means is that we are still worried about the accuracy as the goal of performance appraisal. We want to make sure that there are not rater errors occurring, that the rating formats are getting us the information that we want, that we're actually measuring performance, and that we're measuring it reliably and with validity or truthfulness. But we also need to recognize that that's just step one. That's the step of getting a good measure of performance. What you do with that information is the idea of the social psychological process. So how you deliver that feedback to employees, how you provide opportunities for the employees to feel there's justice in the performance appraisal system, how you make sure that the performance appraisal system is being used in a way that develops employees positively, providing coaching, basically performance management. That's the contextual approach. So, for the rest of this particular module, I'm going to go over just some of the specific rating formats that are used to measure performance, especially when that performance is not clearly and objectively measurable. So again, an objective measure of performance is simply how many days were you late, how many days were you absent, how much total dollars of sales has a salesman done or a salesperson done in the last semester or the last 4 months. We're going to talk about what happens when you're having to actually try to rate performance that's not as cleanly or easily quantified. So we're going to talk about these rating formats, and this comes from that early focus, the original focus that I-side psychologists had historically, which we still need to pay attention to. It's still important. But moving on from that, we'll start talking about the contextual approach further. So broadly speaking, there are 4 easy ways, or not easy ways, 4 generally used ways that can measure performance that are used commonly in organizations. Probably the most commonly used is graphic rating scales. Basically, a graphic rating scale simply means creating statements about performance and then having it rated on a this person never does this behavior all the way up to this person always does this behavior. So it basically is putting numbers to ideas. Behavioral anchored rating scales, often referred to as bars, is a much more systematic and accurate way to get the same kind of information. Checklists are what they sound like. They're just a list of behaviors, both positive and negative, that the rater would basically check a box for each time that particular word or behavior describes the person under evaluation. And finally, we can also look at just employee comparison procedures. And these are all the way from very informal to formal processes where there aren't numbers directly attached to performance. Instead, the performance of each employee is rank ordered from worst performer to top performer. So the graphic rating scale is amongst the oldest formats used and probably one of the most common. It consists of a number of traits and behaviors, usually drawn from a job analysis and usually directly tied to the core responsibilities or objectives of the job as they relate to the organization itself succeeding. It consists of a number of these. Raters judge how much of each particular trait the ratee possesses, or where on the dimension the ratee falls with respect to organizational expectations. So again, the rater is the supervisor, boss, or manager who is trying to judge the performance of their subordinates, the actual employees, or the ratees. So for instance, it might be overall performance, below expectation, a 1, meets expectation, a 4, and truly exceeds expectation, a 7. Generally speaking, with graphic rating scales, there will be more than one item. It might be interacts with subordinates, interacts with managers, has positive interactions with customers. It'll be a series of items, usually drawn from a job analysis, but whoever is doing the rating is just using these scales to rate how much that statement or that behavior is done or represents the person being rated. Bars are very similar to the graphic rating scales, except that they use behavioral descriptors as anchors. So all an anchor refers to is the verbal descriptions on a numerical scale. So if you go back for a second and look at the graphic rating scale, the anchors are those 3 little phrases Below expectations, meets expectations, exceeds expectations. Those are the anchors. In a graphic rating scale, for each performance dimension, there's going to actually be a series of behavioral anchors. So it's no longer just exceeds or meets or below expectations. It's specific examples of what that number represents. So on this example, we have a bars for following procedures, and it goes from a 1 to a 10, 1 being very poor performance and 10 being very good performance. Notice that a 2.5 is take shortcuts around established procedures at every opportunity. So if you're rating someone and you're wondering what exactly is a 2 on this scale, a bars is going to give you that information. So a 5.5, which is pretty much meeting expectations at the middle of the scale, usually follows most important procedures, but skips steps in the process. And finally, what does perfect performance, a 10, look like? Never deviates from the procedures for a particular task and takes the time to do things according to the manual. So that's the idea behind a bars, is that it's less interpretable by the raters. So when raters are looking at a graphic rating scale, the example we were using in the previous slide on a 1 to 7, what someone thinks is exceeds expectations may vary from rater to rater. It's kind of a judgment call. In here, you've got to kind of defend the number you give based on these behavioral anchors. Now, to create a bars system is actually a pretty involved process. The process for developing bars, step 1, we need subject matter experts. These, again, can be incumbents, they can be organizational psychologists, IO psychologists, they can be human resources experts, they can be managers. It's whatever is appropriate. You gather them together, and they identify and define several dimensions that are important for the job. And again, often you'll have some consultants or experts that are also drawing this information from a job analysis. Once you have that list of all the dimensions that need to be measured for performance, so step 1 is about determining what are the key dimensions that define performance for this job. You then have a completely separate group of SMEs that generates a series of behavioral examples for each of those dimensions. So if one of the dimensions was follow procedures, you would have a group of people that hold that job and work at that job, try to just come up with every example they can of both positive, neutral, or negative examples of people following procedures. All the way from never follows procedures and constantly causes accidents to always follows procedures, never deviates from the books. This creates critical incidents. It creates examples of actual behavior that capture that dimension. So once that group generates all of these items, and they'll generate these items for every single dimension, you then will take all of the items without those dimensional labels on them, and you'll retranslate them. You'll have another group of experts, possibly SMEs. A lot of times this is where IO psychologists will come back in, and they'll sort those critical incidents into the appropriate dimensions. So the idea here is that if the critical incidents really represent what they're supposed to, a naive rater, a rater that wasn't involved in step 1 and step 2, should identify that critical incidence of what dimension it belongs into. So you can kind of see through this process, a lot of people are being able to define what the dimensions of performance are. A lot of people are generating examples of what good and bad behavior on each of those dimensions are. And in the third stage, we have experts that are making sure those critical incidents really map on to those dimensions. Once we actually have that, we then have rating the behavioral examples and effectiveness. So once they're sorted, we would then go and, for example, if one of the dimensions was following procedures, there might be 37 examples. So step 4 is about actually determining what each of those examples would rate on that 1 to 10 scale. Is this an example of 4 behavior? Is this an example of 6 behavior? Is this an example of 1 behavior? And finally, once you've done that, you would choose items or maybe even collapse and combine items to create the final behavioral anchors of that scale. So the advantage to this is it is very systematic, it is very detailed, and the developmental scales at the end, the actual measurements of performance, are fairly close to being objective. It's hard to have problems interpreting exactly what a 3 means when you've gone through this process of behavioral anchors. The drawback is it's expensive and time-consuming. The development of bars is a usually months-long process, involves multiple surveys of multiple groups of subject matter experts, and does cost a lot of time and money. Next method we can use is checklists. There's basically a couple of types. The first is just a pure checklist, just positive and negative behaviors. The more positive you get, the more positive your rating. The more negative you get, the more negative your rating. More likely, though, what we're going to see is what's called a weighted checklist. It's a series of items that have previous weight or importance of effectiveness assigned to them. Some items are desirable, some are undesirable, and at different levels. So these weights are usually going to be made through some kind of subjective process, often involving an industrial organizational psychologist, possibly using the job analysis to determine what of these items on this checklist are really important to the job. Those should be weighted more, both positively and negative. And what are items that are kind of nice and we'd like to see on the job, but they don't have to be there. Those should be worth less points. Another type of checklist is a forced checklist. Forced checklists were kind of created to try to help the process that, unfortunately, when you're using a weighted checklist, it's very easy to determine which items just on their face are positive versus negative. So if you really liked an employee and you were their manager rating them and you wanted them to have a high rating, it's pretty easy to go through and just check all the positive boxes to make sure they get a high rating. The problem with this is that if it's easy to determine how to kind of slight the scale to a positive or negative number, it also means that possible biases of basically you just rating people you like higher regardless of their performance can occur. The forced checklist is an attempt to try to stop this. The raters, in this case, every single item is a pair of items. Or 2 of 4 items. So, for example, a forced weight checklist might be that for every line you have 4 examples and you have to choose 2. The problem is there's usually going to only be one truly positive item, a couple of neutral items, and a negative item. And what's been found is that, generally speaking, this using a forced checklist does tend to reduce rater bias and distortion. The drawback is generally raters do not like it. They feel like they lose control over the rating process. And a lot of times you do have a situation where you really have either a really great employee or a really horrible employee. And the forced checklist is going to keep you from giving them spotless reviews. By forcing you to always choose a couple items out of each list, you're almost forced to occasionally give people some neutral ratings. And likewise, someone that's really poor in their performance, you're occasionally going to give them some relatively neutral ratings, when what you really want to put down, and is accurate at that point, is either all positive for the positive employee or all negative for the negative employee. So this is just a quick example of a checklist. So we have the behavioral descriptors, we have the checkbox. The scale would not necessarily be included on this. So the people doing the ratings might not actually know the weights. So this is a computer information and systems manager, and notice right off the bat, effectively manages backup and computer help systems. Well, that's their primary job. That's what they're paid to do. That's worth 8.5 points. So notice if that was the only positive behavior, and then the only negative behavior was doesn't anticipate likely problems, they're still going to get a relatively decent rating because, yeah, we'd like them to anticipate likely problems, but at the end of the day, the main thing is they need to manage the computer systems. Employee comparison procedures. Basically, this is a catch-all for any time you're not actually putting quantitative numbers directly to the employees themselves. So the previous systems we've talked about, graphic rating scales, you're assigning numbers to performance on an individual level. Each individual is getting scores. On bars, again, you're using behavioral anchor ratings to give each employee specific ratings on various dimensions of performance. And checklists, again, you're putting together a list of specific behaviors that an employee does or does not do, and again, assigning a number. And then once you have those numbers assigned, then you can make comparisons. Employee comparison procedures jump straight to the comparison process. So there's not a process necessarily of assigning any numbers systematically to employees. The person doing the ratings is going to evaluate the ratees simply on how they compare with other employees. So ranked order can be useful for promotion decisions and is often a fairly quick method. And the idea here is that you simply, knowing all the information you have as a manager, who is your very best employee? Who's your next employee? Who's your third employee? And all the way down. You're literally just going to rank order from top to bottom. So you're not assigning a 3.72. You're just saying, first, this is my best. My second best, my third best, my fourth best. A slightly more complex system is a paired comparison process. Think of this as kind of like playoffs in any sport. You put all of your employees together, often in an Excel graph, and basically start just randomly pairing them up and comparing. Of these two, which is the best employee? Of these two, which is the best employee? And you move that process forward until you actually, again, come to your best employee. Both of these are fairly good for decision making as far as a quick way. Now, they are not as effective for providing documentation, and they're not as effective as providing developmental feedback, but they're often what we find happening in organizations. An attempt to make these two methods, rating orders and paired comparisons, a little bit more systematic is a forced distribution. This is often done because ratings are tied to raises. However, these systems have not been very well received in the courts. The idea of a forced distribution is basically that a manager is going to have to choose a certain number of their employees, a percentage if you will, to be underperforming, and they have to choose a certain percentage that are overperforming. It makes a manager forced the manager to make an even distribution of performance. So generally it's based on a normal distribution where maybe only 10% of their employees can actually be rated highly, 10% have to be rated lowly, and the rest are rated somewhere in the middle. As I said, a lot of public lawsuits and civil lawsuits have resulted from these systems, and a lot of organizations have kind of shied away from using them. So the advantages and disadvantages of these systems, and again, these are methods to try to objectively measure subjective performance. So objective, we can easily agree on it. It's numbers, and people, if we had multiple raters, they would all agree on the same number. That's the goal of trying to come up with an objective measure. But what we're trying to measure is fairly subjective, performance that isn't clearly linked to easily defined numbers to begin with. We're having to come up with these ratings. And again, the graphic rating scale, very easy to develop and use. The disadvantage, lack of precision and dimensions. Different raters will often interpret the numbers very different, and we also don't have a lot of precision in those anchors. What exactly is meeting expectations? What exactly is exceeding expectations? We don't know. It's left to the rater to make those choices. Bars takes that ambiguity out of the system. It's precise with very well-defined anchors, and it's generally well received by both raters and ratees. It's very easy for you to point, this is why I rated you a 4, because this is what your behavior looks like, and it matches this description. The problem is the initial construction is very time and money intensive, and also, generally speaking, it's been found that once you go through this whole process, you may reduce a little bit of error, but there's not a lot of evidence that you actually get superior accuracy. So you do get superior perceptions, and you may get superior decision making. You may also result in the actual, if you have multiple raters, they'll probably be closer in their ratings if you use bars. But as far as it actually showing a superior accuracy as far as organizational decision making, not as much evidence as we would have liked to have seen. Checklists are also easy to develop and use. However, rater errors are very frequent when we look at checklist systems. Though they're very easy to use, a lot of times what people use as kind of their rule of thumb when completing checklists is they basically go through their mind and decide who they think their best employee is anyway, and then give them all positives. It almost just provides a systematic way for them to do employee comparison methods. And again, our final method, employee comparison methods, precise rankings, useful for administering rewards on a limited basis. So if you have to come up quickly with who you want to do, if you need to fire someone quickly, if you need to give a promotion quickly, this is a very quick way to make the decision. However, it somewhat can be time intensive, especially if the manager doing these decisions is having to go through a lot of employees. And generally it is not well received by raters or ratees, and depending on the system, may also not be well received by the courts.